All right. So, all right, cool. I think I'm going to start talking. Feel free to follow along. If you have any questions,
I'll support anyone who needs
yeah.
help or something. Just raise your hand. I'll come over.
So, if you open up the sample scene, you have something that looks like this. It's a basic 2D platformer brought to us by the lovely people at Unity Technologies. Let's go ahead and play it. Yeah, you can walk around, die if you're bad at the game. And then you should be able to jump on things like Mario. Cool. So currently it works, but that's not good enough because we want it to work, but in a different way. So Unity has two input systems. I'll start us off by showing, and if you go into your project settings, there's going to be a tab called Input. Why can I not find it? Am I blind? There, Input Manager. And under Axes, you have all these different inputs. So you have horizontal axis, vertical axis, 3 fire buttons, which are all mapped to something, jump, and the list goes on. And it's very clunky, to say the least. It's just a lot of different names. And then you can add more, and then you have to map it to it by just putting in, you can do like mouse 1, which works, but then for some, if you want to use a controller, you'd have to be like joystick button 0 and joystick button 16. And like, no one knows what that means. Nick, do you know what that means?
Joystick button 16.
Well, which button is that?
16.
Okay. That's when you press a 16 button on your controller.
Everyone knows that.
Yeah. So we don't want to use this input system because luckily Unity has the new input system, which is now 5 years old. And they have not come up with a better name for it. So to install it, you're going to want to install it from the package manager. So first thing we're going to do is go to Window, and then we're going to want to go down to our package manager here. And this might take a second to load. It has to fetch all the packages, and make sure it's looking at packages in the Unity registry. If you don't have internet, I'm so sorry.
Matt.
Yeah. But once you're in the Unity registry, you're going to scroll down a bit because they are alphabetized, and you're going to want to take input system. So I guess they do have different names. The old one is input manager. The new one is input system. I love it here. Yeah. So you find input system, you're going to want to hit install. And that's going to take a second.
We'll restart the project.
And it's going to restart the project.
Did you show them the old input system in code?
In code. I did not yet. Okay. I will do that.
It's going to yell at you about any old code you have, just because when you migrate over to the new input system, it suddenly says all the old input manager code is terrible and bad and hates you.
Yeah. So right now it says you want to restart to use the new input system. And I'm actually going to say no to this, and I'll show you why in a second to prevent what Nick just said.
Say no too.
You can say no. Do not restart it yet. But we are going to have to restart in like a minute. So I'll give people a second to get that installed. And then we're going to, let me open back up the project settings. And I'm just going to dock them over next to my console just for simplicity's sake. All right, I know internet's slow, so I'll give like 30 seconds for that to load in. Any questions so far? All right. So under the project settings, for some reason, this is in player. They put everything in player where they don't know where to put it, I've learned. So if you go to player and then go to other settings and you scroll down for a little while, and you have to look carefully because they're very poorly organized. You'll find something that says active input handling eventually in the configuration tab. And by default, it's set to old. So if when they had the pop-up and you said, yes, change it, it would then put it onto new, which is great because it reads the new inputs, but then it wouldn't be able to run any code if you have any old inputs. And I cannot guarantee during this workshop we're gonna be able to change every bit of code that use the old system, because we're only gonna be focusing on the player character. So to get past this, I'm just gonna say we're gonna set it to both. So it'll be able to read both the new and old input systems. All right. And then it'll give you a warning that once you do this, it has to restart. So we're gonna hit apply. And then we wait for Unity to restart. There it goes. To look at my a preview of my messy desktop that I need to clean.
It's not normally the right side. Actually, you start putting files on the
It
right.
started on the right side.
And then it's cat with the bucket on its head.
It's a cat with, yes, with a bucket on. I had to think about that. I thought you referred to a different cat, the cat human person. Yeah, that's Shmoop. He's a cat with a bucket on his head. He's basically my unofficial mascot for my existence. Cool. So Unity is open again. And hopefully, as long as it's set to both and not new, should still be able to hit play and play like nothing changed. Was there a question? What was it?
Was it okay that it's an error now when you hear IC, are you logged in?
I think that's just. Yeah, that should be fine. That's just if you're not logged in for Unity. You should see it though. That's just if you want to access your own registry, but the input system is in Unity's. Oh, you have an error?
I think it's just not.
Yeah, I think so. Go to your edit. I think it's set.
Anyone else having errors with moving into both?
Yeah. Other settings.
It's just like,
Oh, slow down. Yeah, it says yes. Oh, yeah, all good. I'm gonna start it.
anyone else need help with moving?
All right. Everyone all right if I move on? Yes. Okay. It's recorded. And this,
Did you hit record?
yeah, yes, it's definitely recording. There's a little icon there.
Okay.
Don't worry. If I were to forget to record any workshop, that would be this one. So things still work as intended. So let's take a look at now what the code is doing. So this game has a lot of scripts, but what we're going to want to look at, we're only actually going to be editing for now one script for this part of it. So if you go into the scripts under mechanics, and then you're going to find one called player controller. I believe this is it. Let me double check, but yeah, that is definitely it. So let's open that up. Cool. So give people a second to get that open. I'm actually going to use board to visualize what's happening. Oh, it might be hard to see over there. I will use. I don't have some. I will use. I could use notes. I will use Pixelmator though. With a trackpad, so it's basically MS Paint. All right. So if we look at this code, basically what's happening is under our update function, if control enabled, so that's just checking can the player do anything, because if, say, for example, you're paused, then control will likely not be enabled. Then we're checking if they're moving horizontally, so the input dot get axis horizontal. Then you check whether or not they're jumping with the input dot get button down jump. And then if they're not jumping, you stop the jump. And this all happens every frame. So as the way this is basically working, if I just illustrate it out, I'll show like the older and the newer system. So it's like a constant loop here of checking. So if there's an event here, then it gives the signal to move. I love drawing with a trackpad. Pretend this says something. And it's just going to keep doing this every frame. Whereas in the new system, it is still going to check for things, but we're basically going to specify, okay, we got in our command to move. Let's access the script and get our function. So it's a lot less hard coded, basically, because we're basically going to specify here's the command that's happening. So whether you press a button on a controller or a key, it's going to have a name, and then we just get the link. We're going to link up a function in code, as opposed to checking all of this inside of the code. So not my proudest work in terms of an art piece, but let's go ahead and start that. So I'm going to leave the update as is for now, and we are going to start updating it. You might be wondering the update jump state that we're going to want to keep. So that's just seeing what happens when you jump. It's not actually the input you press to jump. And then there should also be the move as well. Yeah, so the move.x is getting the horizontal axis. So, okay, so let's start by changing jumping, because I think jumping, or we'll start with moving. I think moving is actually a bit simpler. So I'm going to start by making a new function, and I'm going to make sure it's a public function, because we're going to want to be able to access it outside. So public void move. And it did that for some reason. All right. So one thing we're going to want to get is our context for moving. And before I finish filling in this code, let me explain what that is. So we're actually going to make our input system. So back in Unity, I'm just going to put in my assets folder. If you go to create, at the very bottom, you'll see input actions. You can call your controller anything. I'll just call it player. If we open player up, you'll see there's no action maps. Let's make one. And you can name them different things. So if you want to say, I want to get the player action map or the UI action map, this is where you can name them different things. We're only going to have one. I'll just call this player as well for simplicity. So we're going to get the player action map from our player. And then we're going to want two objects. So the first one, I'll write jump first because it's the simpler of the two. Under actions, I'm just going to add jump. All right. And now next to jump, I'll give people a second. Any questions? Sorry.
You know, bring what?
An input actions. You wanna?
Oh, input act.
Yeah.
All the way down.
Yeah, all the way down.
That look like this.
All right. So on my jump action, if I hit the little plus to the right, the first thing I'll see is add binding. And this is where I actually specify what do you do to jump. For some reason I made two. I think I did. That's interesting. Didn't used to do that. So on my first binding, it says no binding. I'm going to edit the path. So here you have all your different options. So you have a keyboard, gamepad, joystick, mouse, pen, touch screen, any like input that you could want is somewhere here. You can also do the listen function. So if I say I want jump to be the space bar, I can just do listen, press space, and then it'll say I can immediately do either space or I can say any key on a keyboard. So I'll say space on a keyboard does jump. Let's also make it so you can press a controller button. So I don't have a controller plugged in, so I'll do this the other way. If I go to gamepad, this is where you'll see all the buttons on a traditional gamepad. And you can also, one thing that's cool about this that you couldn't really do easily on the old system is specify, I want certain things on different controllers. For example, like proceeding in UI is usually the south button, so like the bottom one. But on Switch, it's the A button, which is on the right, or the east button, because they like being different. So you could then specify on a Switch controller, I want it to be east, but on like Xbox or PlayStation, I want it to be south. But we're just going to go to the top and just say button south. You can do east, north, west, whatever you want to be jump. I think south is just the most common controller. And don't forget to save. So there's a save asset button right up there, just to make sure you don't lose your progress. You can also check autosave if you'd like, but I prefer not to because I get worried that I'm going to screw something up and then lose something. All right. Any questions up to this point? Oh, we get controllers passed around. Hopefully they work. I really hope they do. But I don't know how old these are. They're 360 controllers, right?
Yes.
God.
360 ones didn't work. It's the older ones that worked.
Okay.
Yeah, they are.
All right. So I have my jump. Let's also make a function for moving. So if we go to jump, you'll notice it has an action type attribute, which is currently set to button. Because jump, all you're doing is pressing a button and you jump. So if I make a new action, I just hit the plus on action. So let's call this move. And move isn't necessarily one button because there's different directions. You can move left, right in this game, but in others you can also move up and down. So instead of button, we're going to do value. And then under value, it's going to do a new drop down for a control type. And we're going to scroll down to the bottom and do vector 2. So what this is then going to do is it basically creates additional levels of movement. So it's not looking at a button, it's going to look at an axis. So it's going to look at an X and a Y coordinate. So if I go ahead on binding, and then it's going to automatically bring up a few things, but let's do listen. Oh, what did that do? I see. So I'm going to say for now, left stick. So we're going to say the left stick on a controller can move it. I'll do a new binding. I'll do the same thing for a D-pad if you'd rather use the D-pad because it's a 2D game. And then for my last one, you'll notice there's the second option is up, down, left, right composite. So what that's going to do is it basically does a binding with sub bindings. Because on a D-pad or a joystick, you can imagine, okay, this is where left, right, up, and down are. They're labeled. But if I do a composite, so I have a 2D vector now. And this is where I'm going to do my W, A, S, and D keys. So I'll just call this WASD. And then you'll notice it automatically fills in up, down, left, and right. So on up, let's just go ahead and do W, down, we'll do S, left is A, then right is D. All right. And if you want to, you can do the same exact thing. If you want to do like the arrow keys, I'm going to just stick with WASD for now because I think it's easier just based on hand placement. So yeah, that's going to be all of the actions we're making for now. Any questions? So at this point, nope. One. All right. So I'm going to close out of that and I'm going to open my script back up. So is anyone familiar with, I know JavaScript does this a lot, where you have different events. So there's going to be a mouse click, and then you get the event of that mouse click, and then that's where it stores all the information. So like the position, timing, all of that. So the input system works in a very similar way using what's called context. So I'm going to start by going up to the very top, and we're going to have to access the namespace of our input actions. So I'm just going to do using, oh, hi Jeff, using unity dot, or is it not unity dot? Is it just unity engine dot input system. Some things are unity dot, some things are unity engine, never remember. So this is going to allow us access to all the different functions to access our input system. So on our move function, we're going to have to specify our context. So that's basically where it's going to understand then, am I moving left or right, or am I moving up or down? And we're not actually going to really use the context much for move, but it will come a lot more handy when we're doing jump. So I'm going to call in as a parameter, I'm going to do input action dot callback context. And then you can name this whatever you want. Most people just call it context for simplicity. That's what it autofills in as if you have IntelliSense. And this context is then going to be all the information of what's actually being pressed on our controller or on our keyboard. All right. Any questions? Here. Nope. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead then. And if you'll notice, just the way that this script works is you want to check first if control is enabled. So that way you're not moving when you're dead or when it's paused. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to say if control enabled. So we're checking if we're able to have control, if control enabled is true. So we have our X and our Y axis, but for this game, when you're moving you're only moving horizontally, and then all the Y axis is handled by jumping. So we're only going to actually move in the X direction. And you notice the way that this game has it laid out in the old system is you have your move.x, and then move.x is basically it's going to access it. So we're going to say our move.x equals, and then we're going to want to get our value. So to get our value, we have to first access our context. And then from our context, so we do context.read value to actually read the value it's taking in. And then we want our vector2. So that's going to take in our vector with our X and our Y coordinate that is taking in for move. So vector2, open close parentheses on the end since it is a function. And then what axis do we want for the X? We want our X axis. So what we're doing is we're basically saying we want the player to move in the X direction, and we want it to move based on where the move is going in its X axis. So whether that be left or right. Cool. So with that made then, we should now be able to update our update function. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all mentions of moving. So this line here, when we're actually saying that we're going to get the horizontal axis, I'm going to delete that. And I'm also going to delete this else statement that if you're not moving in horizontal to set it to 0, because this is reading the value of the vector 2. So if that vector 2, if we're not moving anything, that'll already be 0. So that's already going to be handled for us. All right. And any questions? We'll take a bit of a code break for now while we link everything up. Nope. All right, let's let this compile. All right, and just for fun, let's play our game. You can still jump because that's still using the old system. We can no longer move though. And that's because we made our input system. We haven't actually linked it up yet. So first step, and I forgot to do this, is we have to actually make a script based on our input system. So it does still need to actually read it from, do you actually have to do the C# class this way? You still have to? I prefer doing it as well. Yeah. You know, I don't know 100% because this is if you want to actually access like the individual functions in script, which we're all doing it through context. But I'll do it anyway to be safe. So if I'm selecting my input actions, which I called player, there's a generate C# class checkbox. All right. And then I just hit apply. And what did it say? Oh, an action map cannot be named. Okay, so there's already something named player, so I can't actually call it player. All right, that's annoying. Don't need to do that. I would say you can rename the C# class here.
Yeah, you can do the player input thing.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna do. Okay, so you don't have to actually.
Yeah, I would skip that.
All right, cool. Don't forget about that then. It's not important. It's just gonna clear. Cool. All right. So on my player object, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to add a component. And the component we're going to want will be something called player input. This is built in with the new input system. So I have player input. So this is where it's basically going to give the player all the different inputs that they're able to access. So first I'm going to have to specify what input actions I'm using. So I'm just going to drag in our player input actions. Our default map, player is the only one I've made, so that's fine. And then on behavior, instead of send messages, we're going to invoke Unity events. So once I do invoke Unity events, if I do click events and then click player, you'll notice my jump and move have already appeared. So in that case, I'm going to add something to my move function. So we're going to have to take in an object. I'm just going to drag my player object in because we're going to want to access a script that's on it. You could also just drag the script directly, but that's all the way at the top, and dragging that would be a pain. But on my player, I can then go to, we're going to see player controller, that's the name of the script. And at the very top, since we already specified it's using a callback context, you'll see move. And I'll click that. And now the actual move function of pressing the WASD keys or using a controller stick is going to be linked to the move function we've made in our script. I'll give people a second. Feel free to ask any questions. All right. So now I'll save this for safe measures. If I go ahead and play, I can move around just like I could before. And this should also, if you plug the controller in, should also work with like the stick or the D-pad, whatever you specified. But yeah, everything seems to be working with moving. So you can let me know if you have any issues. Give people a second. Yep. The what? The events. Okay. So events, then under player, there's jump and move. And then I just dragged in the player object, the one just to there. And then from there, I went to the player controller and then clicked move. Which make sure if it doesn't appear there, make sure it's public. Because otherwise it'll be hidden. Here.
So. So. First, player controller. You want to make sure you're in an admin space. There you go. Action. You have to, where you have to do. Right next to it, it's like a new function, yes. Yeah, you're gonna have to, since you have to begin. Yeah. Play. Input. Action, input action. No, so you don't. But you're gonna have to. Yeah, you're changing the parameter. Does enter. When you. That's all it is. So yeah, now that you're out of the play. Are we doing it again? Yeah, now you. The player. Yeah. Player controller, public board. Yes. Cool.
Yeah, it's better than doing the alternative. Yeah, it's way easier.
All right.
Just like this, oh, this steps.
Wait for them. You want to play around with that for a bit?
Yeah, it's really effective. I don't like. Without having to. Yeah. That's a lot of work. That's a lot easier. But actually, like 15 checks for specific
Things basically doing the input out system, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Everyone all set? Cool. So next step is going to be doing the same thing for our jumping. So we can easily migrate that over. So if I play, there's a fun quirk on jumping, which a lot of platformers have, where you can hold it down to jump for longer. And that's basically accomplished by triggering a jump. And then if I let go, it just stops the jump. So it isn't really as much I hold down to jump longer as it is I let go of the button to stop jumping. So that's something we're going to have to keep in mind. So I'm going to go back onto my script. I have my move function here. I'm going to do the same thing for jump. So public void, we'll call this jump. Is there already something called jump? Good, there is not. All right. And just like the move, we're going to take in our input action dot callback context, and I'll call it context again. Of what? Yeah, we're gonna do that as well. Yeah, good catch. So yeah, the first thing we're gonna do is just do if control enabled to make sure. So when you're gonna want, I'll make sure if you wait 10 seconds or so, you're gonna be able to get back in. Awesome, the door worked. That's our first win today. Yeah. All right. So similar to the move, where basically we took the vector's value and the context. For jumping, we're going to take the context of what's actually being done. So we're going to say that if, and we're going to say context dot performed, and I'll just do a comment for now. This will be jump pressed. And then we're going to do another one. So if, and now instead of performed, because that's going to be when you're actually pressing the button, if context dot canceled, and that's going to be when you're letting go of the button. And I know there's another way of doing it as well, where you're checking like if press this frame, but I effectively do the same thing, I believe. So this one's just a little less typing. And then this will be jump stopped. All right, so now all that we really need to fill in is the code that's already written for us. So here they're doing, if the jump is grounded, we'll have to keep that in mind as well. And you press the jump button. Then we're gonna do jump state equals jump state dot prepare to jump. Otherwise, we're gonna do this code here, which stops the jump. So I'm gonna do an and statement on context that performed. I'm gonna say and jump state is equal to jump state dot grounded. Do capital J. So we're going to check to see if it's performed and the player's currently on the ground. And that's another function that was built into this code already. All right. And then instead of just the comment, I'm just going to copy our jump state equals jump state dot prepare to jump. Cool. And then canceled, pretty similar. We don't really need to check because we want to be able to cancel if we're in the air. So we're going to not have the checking for grounded. I'll just copy in this code here, which is stop jump equals true. So that's going to tell the code to stop jumping. And then it also triggers the player to stop jumping. I'm not 100% sure what the code is running at this point, since I didn't read all of it, but this is what they wrote to stop jumping. All right. So once that's there, we should be able, because that's everything then, in our update function, except update jump state. So I'm going to keep that there because I believe what that's going to do is that's actually what's going to be looking at what the player is currently doing. So that's going to be used later down the line. So I'm just going to delete everything except these two lines, the update jump state and the base dot update, because these are going to be used by other elements in the code. All right, any questions? Nope. All right, let's go back here and I'll double check to make sure I cannot jump currently. All right, I can move around, but I cannot jump. So on our player, scroll down again, check our player input events player. We're going to add an event on jump, drag our player in. Then on our function player controller, and then you'll see jump at the very top. Let's save that. I'll save and run. Cool. And now I am able to jump. What's the error here? Sometimes you might see this error at a user's Boken build slave. You can just ignore that. That's just something that sometimes happens. It'll literally, you can just clear it. It doesn't affect anything. It's just a slight Unity bug, but it's not harmful. So yeah, any questions? Because that's going to wrap up the first portion of the input manager.
And what happens if you die while moving right? You keep moving.
Keep moving.
Yes.
That's one
Yes.
of the bugs left over from how we moved logic over. We had that move that execute zero line. That used to prevent us from moving to the right when we weren't inputting anything. But we removed that as part of migrating over. All it is some logic changes on our end.
Yeah.
I assume you don't care to do that.
We're not super worried about logic stuff here.
Yeah, it's more so just
Hard to do it.
learning the system more than
I'm going to
the,
show you how to add multiplayers right after this, and it will break a lot of things
yeah,
because you don't want to add multiplayer to a game designed around single player off the very end.
yes.
But it is possible. That's what we're going to show you.
So yeah, if you get those Boken build slave errors, if you just play again, they'll probably go away. If not, if you just restart Unity, they'll definitely go away. It's just Unity being dumb.
We are going to switch over to
Yeah.
the multiplayer section of the workshop. Let's stop up so we can control it.
Yep, sounds good.
Get everything up
All right.
running.
Everyone good on input? Cool.
If you have a question at this point, just raise your hand and Connor will help out.
Yes.
Record, screen share screen. All right. So the first thing I'm going to show you is how you can actively manage the inputs and devices you have on your Unity. So this is sort of part of the new input system, not really. This is just a separate window that we're going to be going over. It's called, you go to window up here, go to analysis, and go to input debugger. And this shows you the number of devices you currently have set up. I have a mouse and a keyboard and a X input controller Windows. That's obviously just my Xbox controller. And as we can see, we went through all that hard work that Connor did to set up the new input system so that we can now actually control stuff with this controller, same way we would hold the mouse and keyboard. So if I press play, it's going to allow me to control the game with this controller. I'm going off of no music. I'm going off of the second section of the workshop. We have a release set up for input system. So if you, for any reason it's not working for you right now, you can just pull that new release input system. That's going to carry us over from this portion of the workshop onward. All right, so we have a input system that allows us to hold controllers, keyboards, and mouse. It all goes to the same thing. I can jump on the controller, I can move on the keyboard, or vice versa. It allows me to pretty much say this one player has all my devices. It's greedy. What we're going to do now is set it up so these two players or these two devices host different players. We'll first do that with a single screen, and then we'll do split screen. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is enable the game to allow multiple players. What we need to do that is set up a player manager. This is also built in as part of your Unity new input system. So if you right-click the sample scene, you press create empty, or create something called a player manager. Doesn't matter what you call it. That's just what I'm calling it for now. And the thing we're going to attach is the thing that actually matters. That's the player input manager. That's the thing we attach. Now, there's a few things we need to do when we attach the player input manager. We need to specify what the player is. So when a new player joins, we can spawn in one. All we're going to do for that is take that player prefab, which is the blue icon with the word player on the left in the hierarchy scene, and drag it into the player prefab section. And we're going to say, hey, we want a new player to join whenever a button is pressed. That just means that when I press a button on my new device, it's going to spawn a new player. There's other ways you can do it, but you can look up tutorials for those as you need. Let's limit the number of players to 4, which is just general practice. You could hypothetically have as many as you want as devices your controller supports. And this split screen section down here, we will eventually use for split screen. We're just going to do this first of all without it. So believe it or not, you have added multiplayer at this point. I'm going to show you that you can now add a second player in, and it should work fine. My first player is on keyboard, and I'll plug in my controller. I press A, and they're on top of one another, but they are two characters. Character 1 controls the keyboard on the controller. Character 2 on the keyboard. And they both do separate things when I press the buttons on the other thing. Any questions on that part? All that is setting up the player input manager. All right, cool. The next part is where it gets tricky. Setting up split screen is going to require us to do a few things with layer masks and camera work. Okay. So when we want to set up split screen, the first we can do is enable split screen down here. This is going to say, hey, I want a new screen for every player that spawns. If we try to work it like this, you're going to notice an issue right away, which is that it'll follow there'll be an issue with cameras. So it won't actually allow me, I don't think, to play it. I think it's going to give me an error the second I spawn in. Yeah, player has no camera associated with it. That's because we now need to go into the player input that we attach to the player prefab and attach a camera. So we're going to go open up the prefab, scroll all the way down to player input. And here is where it says camera. This is where we specify the camera that it is going to use for split screen. Now, obviously, we need a new camera for each player, correct? Each camera we spawn in, new player, new screen, sort of. That's split screen. What I'm going to do as part of this is I'm going to drag in the cameras to the prefab so that we are spawning in a camera with the player every time we spawn a new player. All you need to do for this is click on main camera, click on CMV camera, which is your virtual camera controller, and just drag them to the player prefab. And if you do it correctly, you should see it be nested in the player prefab like such. Any questions at this point? Okay. One important thing we do have to do at this point is make sure to apply these changes to the prefab. So we're going to open up the player. We're going to go to overrides, and we're going to say apply all. You're going to get some errors about the references. Don't worry too much about that. Like we've said before, there is stuff with the existing project that doesn't love multiplayer. Any questions on setting up the prefab? Yes.
Okay, so, sorry, I got distracted for a second.
Mhm.
How did you get the cameras on the left?
So there's two cameras already existing called main camera and CM VCam 1. That's your real camera and your virtual camera.
I just dragged
You just drag them on top of the player. And it should be nested like a tab structure like that. And then once you do that, you can click the override button that's in the top right here. And that allows you to apply overrides. The last thing we need to do with the cameras, or not the last thing, but the last thing for prefabbing is we need to say, hey, what's my camera? We still need to do that right here. So we're going to specify the main camera that's a part of the prefab is the camera. We're just going to drag that in. And once again, override, apply all. We're not done yet, but I am going to show you where we're at now when we try to spawn in multiple players. There'll be two errors that we're going to deal with after this. One of which involving audio, the other of which involving, well, you'll see. So I have my player one. Plug in my controller. Find my USB port. Spawn my player two. Now, they still control separately, but notice how they both follow player one. Or that might be player two. That's player two. They both follow player two. The reason for this is because of camera masking. We're going to need to apply some layer mask to our cameras so that camera 2 doesn't pick up virtual camera 1. Or camera 1 doesn't pick up virtual camera 2. If you don't understand that, that's fine. There's a good write-up I can link later on involving, there's a video that actually depicts a lot of this. But essentially, all you need to understand is the brain that's telling the camera what character to follow is projecting that to both of the cameras. And we need to make sure it doesn't listen to both cameras. So we're going to do that. There's also one additional error, which will be very annoying. It's not actually a red error. It says there are 2 audio listeners in the scene. Please ensure there's always exactly one. We can fix that quite easily. Currently, the reason why that's happening is because the audio listener is attached to the main camera. All we're going to do to fix that is drag it from here to the game controller. That's not going to let me drag, so I'm just going to go around this by removing it. Remove audio listener, override, apply for the player, which just means I've removed the audio listener from the player prefab. And now I'm going to attach it to the game controller because I don't want to deal with the error popping up 1,000 times. All right. Any questions so far? All right. Yep. Thank you.
For some reason, my background's shaking.
Is it when your background's shaking?
Yeah, the background shakes when
When you have 2 characters or you have 1 character?
I have one character.
Let's not
It's not important.
worry about that too much. I don't think that should be
Mine
anything.
was the same. Still the artifact
That shouldn't have any
built.
part of that. Okay, we're now going to worry about the camera masking. So this is a little complicated, so we're going to want to follow along. This is going to involve bit shifting and layering. So this is not my favorite thing to do, but that's why I have notes. All right, so the first step we're going to do is set up camera layer tags. We're going to set up in the player object. Notice how the player currently has no layer. We're going to set that to default for now. And press yes, change children. And make sure to override that as well. And this doesn't seem important, but I'm going to also ask you to open up the enemy prefab and make sure this is also on the default layer. Any questions on changing layers? Right now, all I want you to do is make sure your player and enemy are on the default layer. Okay. Now we're going to set up special camera layers. So if you go to the layer tab, drop down once again, you press add layer. I'm gonna go to the very bottom because these are kind of outside of normal game logic, but this is where I'm gonna set up the camera layers. Hello, tape. We're gonna set up camera layers for 4 different players because we said there's a maximum of 4 players. I'm gonna call them P1, P2, P3, P4. And I'd recommend doing them at layers 28 through 31. If you need to get back to the screen, all you have to do is pick any object, click the layer dropdown, press add layer, and this will bring you to this screen. This is also the screen where you can add sorting layers and tags. And if you don't know what either of those things are, do not worry about it. Doesn't matter for this. All right. Is everyone following along with the layer stuff? Thank you, Dave. Right now, what we're going to do is set the camera layer. We're going to set the layer not to default because we don't actually want to do this statically. We want this to happen dynamically. So we're going to have to write code for that. But one thing we can do right now is set culling layers for the camera. So open up your main camera, and you're going to go down to culling mask under the rendering section, right here, culling mask. Now, what we're going to do is set the camera so it doesn't pick up P1, P2, P3, and P4 layers. The reason for that is because we want to tell each camera which layer it's listening to. We don't want to listen to every single camera layer because that's how we had that issue before, where a camera is listening to its virtual machine component across players. So we're going to click off P1, click off P2, click off P3, and yes, click off P4. And we're just going to apply that. Yeah, I'm going to show something. We're going to set up let's say the cameras, let's put them on P1 for now. This is not part of changing things, but I do want to show you how this works. I've now said that the camera is on P1. And I've also said the culling mask is on, actually, we'll do something like this. I'm going to set the player and everything to P1. So you don't have to follow this part if you don't like. This is just me showing how the culling mask works. So the layer for the player is now P1. The camera's culling mask is also P1. What do you think is going to happen when I play the game? What's the camera going to show?
Literally just player 1?
Close. Everything except player 1. The culling mask, because we deselected P1, it's going to now not show it. It's still there. I just can't see it. All I would need to do is enable the culling layer that would say, hey, I want to see player 1 stuff. And it's there now. This is going to be important because that's how we have the layers, the cameras in their virtual brains talk to one another. So I'm going to make sure to undo that because I actually do want this to stay on default. There we go. So my player is still on default, my enemies are still on default, and I have all 4 camera lasks unchecked for the camera. So now we need to dynamically choose every player what camera mask they're listening to. What that means is we're going to need a script that listens for when new players joins and detects which number player they are. Sounds like it's time to code. So we're going to create a new script. I'm going to call it, let's call it Player Manager. I will put it in the scripts mechanics folder, even though it's not super relevant to go there, but we also need to finish up. So Player Manager. Okay. Once you create that script, you're going to want to attach it to the Player Manager object we already created. And what we're going to do is just like how we set up player input systems, we're going to set up the player input manager system to call C# events when a new player joins. So just up here, just like player input, we're going to change send messages to invoke Unity events. And there's an event here called player joined event. This is an event that's going to run every time a new player joins. And that's how we're going to be able to dynamically run code based off of which number player is joining. Any questions so far? Okay, let's write some code. So open up that player manager script. We're not going to need these 2 codes. Okay, and what we're gonna do is create the on player joined event. So this should be, do remember you need to import using Unity Engine dot input system. Okay. And now what we're gonna do is public void on player joined. And it's gonna be a player input. Player input. And we're just gonna test this by saying debug.log, player joined. I shouldn't have any issues there. Let's make sure it compiles. Yep, all set. So this should tell me every time a player joins. Wait, it won't, because why do we need to do? We need to hook up the event. So on the invoke Unity events in the player joined event, make sure to add the script we just wrote. Player manager in here and call player manager. Oh, is it not? I don't have the right typing. Might be. Do need to find out what the exact typing is. It is. The exact typing is going to be revealed to me shortly. On player input typing is.
So could you show what we put in the events again?
What's up?
What do we put in the events?
Yeah, I'm trying to. I have the wrong typing right now. I'm just trying to fix it.
Oh.
Player input. On player input takes in. Secret. Okay. I'm just gonna open up the other code. This is how you can cheat. Just always open up your GitHub that you already have the project done on. Also, if you do want to grab the file code as an example, it is already available as a release on multiplayer split screen. Though we're not going to cheat that hard. We're just going to look and see what typing we need. We need type. Where are you? Scripts, mechanics, player manager controller. We need type. This is the type because we already have something called player input. So what you want to do is, because there's already something called player input, it's going to think you're referring to a different script. We're going to make sure we're specifying which namespace. So we're going to say, yep, use the Unity Engine.input system.player input version of player input, and not the script that already exists called player input. And now it should compile, and I should have the option to hook up the function here. And just like for otherwise, it is player manager. On player joined is a dynamic because we have the right parameter. And now when we run the code, we can actually see that it's going to do debug.log player joined every time a player joins. As you can see, my first player is in the game. Player joined ran once. I'm going to join a second player. Player joined ran again. Okay. So now we need to write the code that tells us which player we're dealing with and what we need to do. So what we're going to do, this is a good habit to have. You want to keep a list of players that are in the game. Just because this is an easy way for you to find what number player you're on, and also for you to decide, hey, I'm going to do code for player 1 based off this, code for player 2 based off this, because I know what player this is. An easy way to keep track of which player you're on, just keep a list of the player inputs. So if you're familiar with making lists in C#, it's just list the type, or call it the players list, and it's equal to a new list of the type there. Any questions on making that list?
Exactly the same as Java.
It is, but better. It's in C#. Now, I'm gonna cheat and make sure I have everything here. Let's do that for later. Okay. Now, all that we're gonna do is dynamically run some code to decide which layer this camera wants to show for which player. So player 1 is gonna want to see the P1 layer in its camera. Player 2 is gonna want to see the P2 layer. Player 3 is gonna want to see the P3 layer, and so on. We know the numbers for the layers because we actually assign them. So if you go to the layer system, you can see player 1 is on layer 28, player 2 is on layer 29, player 3 is on player 30, and player 4 is on player 31. Now, a very simple way to assign this is int layer is equal to 28 plus the count of the current players. Because we haven't added anything to the players yet. So the first player is going to be empty. Yeah, okay. The first player hasn't been added to the list, so it's 0. So player 28 plus 0 is 28. We add one player to it at the very end. Players, make sure to add that. Players that add, we do player input. At the very end, we'll add a player. So now we know, okay, it's one person list. So the next time we run it, it'll be 29. Next time it'll be 30 and 31. It'll always be the right layer. You can just use an int to represent layer. It'll do some stuff for you most of the time. We will have to do bit shifting for certain things, and I will show you how to do that. Bit shifting is a whole nother topic. I'm not going to worry too much about making you understand that. It's essentially just a way for more compact storing flags, which is what we do with a calling mask. So now, what we need to do is change a few things. We need to make sure that the two cameras have the right calling mask. The camera has the right calling mask set, and that the newly spawned players have the right layer set. So all we're going to do for that is iterate through the cameras on, or iterate through the virtual and real camera that are sub-children of the player. So if you ever want to iterate through the children of an object, you can just iterate through its transform. So we do for each transform child in transform. What that's going to do is essentially say, hey, every time there's a child object to this parent, which is the player object, I want you to do this code. It's a for loop for those. Each of the child, we want to set its layer, which we just do a child dot layer is equal to layer. That sets the layer of the cameras, which means that we are now able to have it listen to one another. And I'm sorry, you do child.game object. It'll yell at you if you try to set the layer of a transform and not the layer of the game object it's attached to. And this bit shifting, I'm not even going to try and fake. I'm going to just copy it over and explain it. So bit shifting is fun. I'm going to explain this the best I can. If you have questions, Google it. So I'm grabbing the camera here because I need to specifically change the culling mask to attach to flip the bit of the layer we want to show. Okay? So I grab the camera with a get cam component in children function. That should be pretty self-explanatory. The hard part's down here. This is me bit shifting the culling mask variable. All I'm doing here is saying turn on the bit in the position of the layer. That is the easiest way I can explain it. Remember that check mark we were doing with the turning on and off P1, P2, P3, P4? That's essentially how Unity does bit shifting in the actual editor. We need to do it dynamically there, which is why that happened. But essentially, if I run that code on 28, it's going to bit shift the 28th bit. And what that means is when I do the culling mask, which is somewhere, rendering, it's going to turn bit 28, which is P1, on or off. That's all it is. Right now we're specifying that it's on when it's 28 or 29 or 30 or 31. It decides what number it's going to be based off that player count. Okay, any questions? Yeah. Why what? Because you need to tell it to essentially handle the one layer we want to handle per player.
But why is there no other ways?
Oh. Ask tape. Ask Unity.
Okay, nice.
One of the biggest complaints with the Unity is not just the split screen cameras because it's taking up layers, but also its audio system with split screen. The two of them aren't super well thought out. So it is definitely a point of concern for future development. However, this is how you do it. And if you, as long as you don't need an infinite number of screens, you should be fine. As long as you're not trying to make a 32-person game. With split screen?
I'm trying to make it 33-person game.
33-person game on split screen?
Yeah.
Not possible.
God damn it.
There is absolutely you can make split screen happen without doing this system. This is just the easiest way that works with the input system. All right. So at that point, everything should be all set. We're gonna go and try. Play the game. I'm gonna unplug the controller. I do have a weird bug in my desktop where every time I start the game with the controller, it thinks it's something else. All right, player one, camera follows player one. Camera two. Camera one falls. Nope, not yet. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
I didn't save one thing. What did I not save? Let's see. Let's see. Who wants to play Spot the Difference? Spot the difference. I'll put up one and put up two. Let's play Spot the Difference. First person to spot the difference gets a sucker.
You mean a sucker punch or
I didn't specify for a reason.
Have normal transforms, so player input transforms.
See, Charles gets a sucker. Yep, that's actually exactly it. What it's doing is it's rather than doing it for the player, it's doing it for the player manager. All right. Charles, remind me, I'll give you a sucker. All right, we're gonna go ahead and start. Now it should be working. Player one, player two, and separate screens, please. Yep. They are following different cameras, and now you have multiple players. If I had more USB ports, it'd be very funny to plug in the other controllers and show you 4-player. Unfortunately, I'm out of USB ports. Unless.
Does anyone have any Bluetooth controller?
No. All right. Any questions on that? Anyone want to take the controller and try it out themselves?
What was the last step you did to fix the thing?
Player input that transforms the transfer. That would work. Some of them might be like just don't work because they are IMDb materials.
Yeah. Can't imagine.
Any questions on multiplayer, split screen, anything related to this?
I thought it was gonna be too much.
And if you had trouble following along due to a number of technical issues and surprises, do remember everything is available in the GitHub and it is recording. There's 3 releases, one for the starter code, one for the end of the first half of the workshop, and one for the completed workshop. You can find all 3 under the release tag. You can see the multiplayer script scheme build, the new input system build, and the starter code.